I love that you have so much fun with politics. Just as a person, I feel like I can come to you and have such awesome, honest chats about politics and in a fun way. I never feel like you're an unfriendly space. And even Daily Dose, it's like fun to read politics, which is something that's like weird to say.
I've also, more recently with the Daily Dose, like when Star and I engage about like what we're going to post today or what we're going to write, whatever. 9 times out of the 10, we are just laughing in the process about something some minister's done or something. So we honestly have such a good time. And I think the humor and having fun is honestly so important. It makes it all worth it.
Yeah, and it rubs off on your listeners, because then your listeners are like, okay, cool, this isn't so hectic. I don't feel like it's so negative. I want to engage. I want to see what's happening. It's awesome.
Thanks to
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, I've been following the Daily like very recently, but since I have started following it, it's been quite enjoyable. Like I don't feel overwhelmed by what I'm reading or, like, switch the TV off kind of thing. It's more like, oh, okay, cool. This is useful and it's, fun to read. So yeah, good job there. I also just wanted to ask, how does one like engage in politics? So let's say other than like, your blog posts on Instagram and things like that. Say for me, like if I want to dive a little bit deeper, but I also want to, maintain a good distance where it's not becoming a burden to my mental health in that sense. How does one go about approaching politics to be informed, but also, stay distant?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I've noticed with my family, the TV will come on, and I think maybe my love is rubbed off a little bit. They'll be like, we're watching the news. But then after about 20 minutes or half an hour, they'll just press any button to get rid of it. Because I think, like you're saying, it can rub off, and it can be, often the news is, cynical and it's disheartening, and it can become a lot, like you're saying, on your mental health. I think what's important is to make sure that you always, firstly, a big thing for us has always been the sources that we use. It's really important, I think, to use good sources. So, platforms like the Daily Maverick, the Mail and Guardian, and, there's some other platforms that have had a bit of a shady history, which I'll stay away from. But I'll often look at who's writing it and which media house it is. But also, Abdul, I think what's really important is to change the story up. I think often now we'll turn the TV on and we already know that the only thing we're going to hear about is COVID and deaths and hospital beds and all of that kind of stuff. So I think once you've got a basic idea of what's going on around you, I think leave it. But often people then get it like almost like a trance. You get sucked in, and you don't want to leave because it's like it gets you hysterical. Like, am I going to be okay? Whatever. But I just think once you know something, forget about it and find something else to learn.
If it's okay, can I ask a question as well? I love politics. I eat, sleep, breathe politics. But I think one trap that I find myself in a lot of the time is I focus a lot on international politics. So, ask me about what's happening with Biden and, Trump or whatever, and I'll be able to tell you. But something that's really frustrated me is that I haven't really engaged with what's going on in South African politics. I don't know who the players are. I have no idea who's in my cabinet, all of that. How did you start? I know you sort of alluded to it in your presentation, but how do you get into that? How do you take note of all the different actors and what's going on and the dynamics behind it?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Sure. If I was to reflect on that, I would say that initial love, just the flags and even like postage stamps, just crazy stuff. I think that initial start got me halfway there. And I think what you're trying to say is that if you didn't have that initially, not that you didn't love the continent, but just from a young age, that same passion, you're looking at South African politics and it looks daunting. It's like, oh, wow, but where do I start? Like, what's this and what's that? And how does this work, and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, where was I going with this? So I think for me personally, I was lucky because I already had that stepping stone to getting there. And, you know, people, yeah, I'm going to have to come back to your point. I had something I was going to say.
No problem.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to start with my question. So I wanted to first say, I think the Daily Dose is such a great platform because I feel like South African news networks aren't so good with Instagram in general. And Instagram's such a great platform because when you're going through your feed and a news story pops up, most of the time I find that I'm going to read it regardless of the fact that it's news as opposed to like pictures, because like it's still visual and it's like small doses, which is really useful. And so I find like I follow the BBC and The Economist and all of those, and I think that South African sources are lacking. Even like Daily Maverick isn't always so good at posting. So I think that I really like that. So I suppose my question leads into that, and it probably relates to Obaka's question, is like, do you have any ideas of how to make South African politics more appealing, especially to the youth? Because I think that that's like quite an important thing, so that people are more involved and people are, I think you're more likely to hold politicians accountable if you're interested in it. So do you have any ideas of how to make it more appealing to especially younger generations?
You've actually just triggered what I was wanting to say to Obake, so I'll just try and bring it all together. But I think that one of the biggest problems is people aren't afforded and given the starter pack, so to say, like some of the basic concepts and basic understandings.
The tools to
start, and then you approach the news and current affairs from there. So I think, you know, like just an example from my experience, people, I promise you, as soon as I know all of the ministers and all this kind of stuff, everyone suddenly thinks, no, Greg's an ANC voter, all of this kind of stuff. Like he's a diehard ANC fan. But something as simple as, so what we'll do is we'll try and, either through my speeches or like the Daily Dose, whatever, we'll always try and provide, as best we can, a little bit of background first, context, so that you have the tools to then read the article with a bit more meaning. Because often you'll read a name, you'll be like, I don't even know who that is, or what office this is, or whatever. So yeah, I think mainly it's just to do with having the right basic understanding, and I think that's lacking. I don't know if it's because maybe, like, I don't know, politics isn't a subject at school, but it is something we really focus on in trying to make it more, the basics, understandable, because then at least you don't delve into that whole, like the deeper side of politics, where it can become controversial, and then it's your views, and then, you know, people don't like them, and then it can just become blurry and get messy.
Cool. And then also, sorry.
No, carry on, every time.
I was just gonna say, do you think that in South Africa, with like national news networks, have you found in your research that the news is skewed in favor of the ruling party? Do you find that with like I don't know, like SABC and ETB, and well, I don't think ETB is state owned, but do you find that like news that's available to the public is biased?
Yeah, so I really think that one of the most fundamental pillars that South Africa has is the freedom of the press, and freedom of speech, obviously. And I mean, South Africa's got a strong journalists, and, you know, I think obviously the media can push a certain agenda, and certain media houses are known to have done that in the past. But like I said, someone like the Daily Maverick, I mean, because they have an investigative journalist branch, Amabungani and Scorpio, they often actually do investigations, and they go and do paper trails, and they go and find like receipts and bank details, and they'll say, poof, X marks the spot, this looks corrupt. But they come with evidence, a lot of it too. So I think journalism in South Africa is honestly, it plays such an important role. And I often say to people, we're complaining about fire pools at Nkandla and Gucci belts and stuff, but that is because we have press that expose these things. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have a clue. We'd think we have a fantastic government, but the press exposes the rot in this country often. And I think, to answer your question, I would say that there'll definitely be some media houses that will have a degree of bias. But I think overall, the media is pretty impartial.
Okay, Greg. I have 3 questions for you. First one is this question around like, what is a way to combat corruption in our society? And ourselves as a society, like, what can we do? And then the other question is, what is your future in politics? Like, I think you're so passionate about it. And I was just wondering, like, where you see yourself going with politics. And then my third question is, I guess, slightly more uncomfortable, but something I would love to know is, how do you feel about being like a white male in the political sphere, like especially in this sort of country? Is there like a sort of stigmatism? I know personally when I see someone like Alan Winde or, some other old white guy, I'm just like, dude.
So Debreeze, I'll start with your last question first, if I can do that. It's been particularly because, also, being a white male, it's also, and I'm also very privileged. And that's why when I looked at the difference in my stance and my views between my first speech at high school compared to at UCT, I mean, like, my whole mindset was very different, because having been and raised and engaged people with a much broader and diverse like places in society, I realized, like, no, I was in a total bubble. So the whole like white male thing, but also I always used to wear, like, just another example, I used to wear like dashikis. I used to wear African garments, like, often. And I was proud of it. And like I said, you must own things. But then through varsity, I've also, only at varsity rather, learned about cultural appropriation. And that's why I was saying it's good to, well, I think it's important to back your beliefs. And what I mean by being a good listener and learning is that, like, my heart hasn't changed in any way for my love of Africa just because I'm suddenly not wearing dashikis as much. But I've learned from what others have to say, something that I just really didn't know before. And I think it's so important, and I think it's cultural appropriation is right. And it makes so much sense because I spoke to people who knew about it. But also going back to the white male thing, people have been intrigued why I don't disclose who I vote for. Every election, even if I'm partying in a club, they'll come whisper in my ear because they think I've had a few drinks now, I'll spill the beans. But the reason I don't is because I feel like as soon as I was to say something like that, I would jeopardize what I have to offer, which is that all I care about is South Africa growing and developing and becoming prosperous. I don't care who's at the helm, what shape or size. I value South Africa's constitutional values and what it strives to achieve. So I just don't disclose who I vote for, because as soon as I do, then I've got a tag on me and everyone will think I'm pushing some agenda. So one day people will actually say, nah, he definitely votes ANC. Then a month later, they'll say, nah, he's definitely a boy in blue. He's a DA boy. And then it changes all the time, depending on what I'm saying. So yeah, anyway, and then my future in politics, it's hard because it really is such a passion of mine. And I thought like maybe it would die one day, whatever, but it hasn't. It really hasn't. The overall, there's a strain which is the same. Like things change over time, but I've got that overall something in me that just, I love it too much. And then like when I stopped studying politics and started studying law, I realized, like, you know, I still love politics through law. There's a lot of politics in so many things. So it's just, and then the daily dose. I mean, that's why, like, I didn't want to stop doing something. And then we found the daily dose, and that gives me meaning and purpose. And it's something to do that I enjoy. Finally, the question on combating corruption. The first thing I think a lot of people somehow seem to think that corruption is a one-sided street. And I always tell them it takes two to tango, always. There's no such thing as corruption with one person. And what I'd also do in my talks back at school and stuff, I would say things just to try and challenge like the status quo and the way people were thinking. I would say something like, can anyone tell me something good that Zoom has done? Because I feel like you hear the word Zoom and it's like, oh wow, corrupt, evil, bad. And then I think you hear South Africa, you just think corruption. When you hear corruption, you just think like ESCOMs, SAA, government, all of this stuff. But it's actually such a deep rot. It's gone across society, even into the media. More recently, unfortunately, strains of it in the courts. So across society, I think it's a problem. In combating it, I really think that when the Scorpions were disbanded in 2007, a very, very powerful group, as soon as they started doing their job too well and big hitters were being put in handcuffs, that thing was disbanded in seconds. They've been replaced by the Hawks. The Scorpions was an independent group, but now it falls within the Department of Police. So, I mean, you're not going to arrest yourself. So I just think a very strong independent watchdog is the solution, like the Scorpions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grieg, for that. And also, yeah, thanks for being honest about like that it's a changing, process, that you go from believing one thing and then changing it to the next. Maybe in a few years, we'll be laughing about something you said tonight. So it's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Another thing with what Greg said, I think it's really important to be able to change, because if you're someone who sticks to what you know, despite having learned new things and someone has presented new information, it shows that you're not really like there to learn. So the fact that you change, like I know I also change. One day I'm this, the next day I'm that. And that's because the more we learn, the more we can make better decisions. So that's to changing. It's a really good thing.
Thanks. Thank you.
No, exactly. Sorry, I've just got so many things. I have so many points that I need to get through. So if we're speaking about, speaking, so you talk a lot about speaking to the people around you. And I think that's great. I think that's a fantastic way of learning and growing and all that sort of stuff. But what you haven't spoken about is the issues that come about with making others do the work for you. And I think that's an important thing to realize, is that if there's something that you can educate yourself on, you should. And, speaking to people around you can only go so far. So that was just a point that I wanted to make. But then here you can write down these questions. There's quite a few. So you spoke a lot about like sticking to facts, making sure of course, validity is great, and making sure that things are verified is very important. But do you actually believe in objectivity? So you say from your daily dose, you make sure that things come from different angles. Do you actually believe in like true objectivity? And then speaking about politics, is everything political? And what do you think of people that say they are apolitical? Right. Then my last one is, what are your current thoughts on the projection of South Africa at the moment? And then
Right.
also,
I knew that
gender
one was coming. That question was inevitable. Do I believe in true objectivity? You know, that's such a good question, because I suppose all journalists are saying like, I'm being objective, I'm being objective. As soon as we're doing a post where we feel like we're going a little bit into it sounding like we're trying to make a point here, we'll just say our heading will be a dose of an opinion, so that then it just has that disclaimer, like take it or leave it. But normally I do think that depending on the nature of the news that you're dealing with, there is a degree of objectivity. And that's what we like to stick to. So for example, you also know, if you ask any of my friends, during elections, we fight, because I have a nightmare with people that think that their vote doesn't count, and that elections is just a waste of time and it's a free public holiday and you put your feet up on the couch, particularly youngsters. And it's because I say to them, like, guys, you know, this is a municipal election, and so we're dealing with municipal services. Like, if you've got a pothole in your road or refuse removal and you're not happy, or like street lighting, you can go to the ballot box. And because it's a municipal election, there have been cases where municipalities have come down to like the last few votes. So I think things like that, like what percentage you require in Parliament to get a majority, or if the land expropriation bill was to be passed, what percentage would you need? I think because that's like hard facts, it's almost going back to those tools I was speaking about earlier. That starter pack. We always start with the starter pack because it is fact, like it is what it is. And then maybe we'll drift off a little bit towards the end, but we always try and keep it factual. And yeah, still on the voting thing, I always tell my friends, I say, guys, if you don't vote, I don't want to hear you complaining about anything. I said, you can complain as much as you want, but then go and vote. That's why we vote, is to deal with
No,
this.
I love that. I love that, because that's my real problem, is when people speak about objectivity, they don't talk about that factual. Like that's a great way of putting it, is that we aim to be more factual, not necessarily saying, oh, I'm objective, I don't have any opinions. It's like we bring facts, and if we give our opinions on that, that's how it works. Thank you so much. That's great.
But also in previous posts, I know you've or at least one that I can remember, you've said like the daily doses opinion, and then said like, we don't generally do this, but we are going to change our, you know, factual stance for a bit, and then give your own opinion, which I think is also useful to people who like want to, because I think it's also important to form an opinion on political issues, because it's, you know, it's kind of useless to just know the facts, because ultimately what that does is inform your opinion. And it's often, you know, something that isn't, I think there aren't always varying opinions in the public sphere, which I think is something that needs to, the news cycle needs to change that, perhaps.
Yeah.
Greg, I'd like to speak on something there that you said about voting. Just quickly, a little side angle there. Like, you know, I also believe that, you know, everyone's vote counts and that you have to go out and vote. But I've recently been doing a lot of research on how corporations and these huge, you know, money hound companies out there, I don't know if this is more American politics, but are like lobbying in the background and are essentially controlling the government. So yeah, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
It's definitely, it's almost like a business in America. Like, other than Obama, he broke the stigma. But if you want to win an election in the States, you need to be backed by big money. I mean, obviously Obama had the character to do it. But in South Africa, I think until recently, I mean, we did a post on it maybe a month ago. There's just been legislation introduced where parties now have to disclose their funding, their sources of funding, which I think is fundamental, because it's not just persons, it's also companies. And then we'll know, like, okay, this company is endorsing this kind of a manifesto, this one's endorsing that kind of a manifesto, and then you can hold them accountable for that. And you can see how much. I mean, are we dealing with 10 Rand or 10 million? But I think, DeBreezy, I think money can never escape politics. Because in my mind, politics and power are synonymous concepts. I think money will always be involved. Even in SA, you know, like as soon as Ramaphosa won the ANC's election in 2017, already straight off the wicket, there was a 500 million Rand donation, whatever, and it's all dodge, and still a public protector's report dealing with that. So I don't think money will ever be cleared from politics, or the influence that money has on shaping political discourses.
What do you think of people that say that they are apolitical?
As in, like, that.
And is everything political?
I think you know what, it all, maybe I'm sounding too law-like now, but I think it all depends on how you define politics. Because I love saying, like, shucks, there's a lot of politics in my family, there's politics in my digs. So I just think my understanding of politics has always been, I suppose, the administration of power. I don't know if that sounds lame, but basically dealing with power and authority. And like, yeah, you know, in the family is the one sibling trying to get more of the spotlight than the other, and what methods will you use to get, like, it's politics. It's the same as this party fighting for another seat in parliament. It's all to do with finding our spot in the spotlight, and the methods of getting there. And so I think personally, like, I don't think you can escape politics. And I mean, we're going back to like Aristotle days. So yeah.
Can you speak a bit on, like, I know a lot of people in our circles, like, you know, like white upper class circles, just don't want to be involved in politics. And can you speak about, like, the dangers of that, or, you know, just your opinions about that? Like, people who just like, no, I'm not, that's too hectic, or whatever.
Yeah, so I think that's also a very good question. I think a big mistake people make is that they'll just see a headline and they'll be like, nah, I don't want to hear about that. Like, oh, we're speaking about BEE. I don't believe in it. Nah, not for me. Or like, nah, I don't believe in social grants because they make people lazy. I'm not going to read about it. So I think that's what I'm saying. The challenge is to speak about the hard things at the dinner table and not back down. Be like, no, you can't say that. Finished. And why do you believe that? Like, enlighten me. I think that, you know, it's not long, sometimes we feel like, no, we're in the democratic South Africa, but it's not long ago that we weren't. And another thing, if I could put to that, I often feel like people dodge political questions because they're in denial about things. So something like, let me think of an example, like, the worst is, you know, people like to say, like, no, people are living under better conditions. We were living under better conditions during apartheid than now. So I just think the easiest way to not agree with something is just to deny it and whack it off from the beginning. Don't even discuss it, because then you don't have to embarrass yourself and be ashamed of your views or anything like that. Yeah.
Yes, so basically challenge everything around you and within yourself.
100%.
And then you'll be able to, you know, actually engage with things. Because denial is a big one for sure.
So I suppose I have a question that links to that. Is obviously information and challenging people within your circles is key, because I think, you know, to be informed about topics and also to be able to challenge people's views helps immensely. But how do you think we can challenge people in power? How do we hold people accountable? Because, I don't know, a silly example, or it's not silly because it actually, I think it demonstrates quite well, what often happens is that, so for example, the Instagram movement a couple of months back to donate to the COVID relief fund, and it was like this massive thing that everyone, you know, the amount of likes I got on this photo, I'm going to donate that amount to the COVID relief fund. And I think people, you know, it ignited in people something that they wanted to help and wanted to help change things. And then a couple of months down the line, we're now hearing about the misappropriation of funds and like the R1 billion that gone to some crony, some you know, someone's brother or something like that. And obviously this isn't a uniquely South African problem, and this does happen everywhere. And it's probably also lucky that we have the journalists to expose it. But how do we as citizens express or try and change things like that? Because obviously there's the judicial system, but that is long and it's not, you know, it's not accessible to everyone. So yeah.
I think, Rube, I think the first, honestly, the most important thing in my mind is that knowledge is power. And that's why I think, you know, it starts with being aware of what's wrong. What are the issues? And like you're saying now, you know, okay, we put in all this money, so where did it go? And then you find out like, oh, no, it was just blown. And then just that knowledge that you have and speaking to everyone, I mean, you'll be so angry and bitter, and it'll leave a bad taste in your mouth. And just that nugget of
how do you stop that from just being pessimism as opposed to like something that can be actionable change? I think that's probably my problem, is that oftentimes like knowing that just helps fuel that Afro pessimism, and the it kind of just plays right into the hands of those who are like, South Africa's going to the dumps, you know? So how do you change? Because I completely agree, it's so important to know.
Yeah. Sure. I mean,
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, I'll go for it.
I think change what you can. That's what I've focused on, is change where you can, what you can, and that is what's going to make a difference. Because, for instance, my specific niche, and Tom spoke about presentation, specific niche is debate violence. That's where I want to work on. That's what it's a massive, and I'll narrow it down after I finish my master's, but that's what I have to focus on, because to be able to challenge all these different, you know, corruption, all this sort of this, as you said, you grow pessimistic. And so the only way to do is, and go forward, is to change where you can, what you can. Knowledge is power, you know. Make sure everyone is as knowledgeable as you are on specific topics, and make sure you keep informed. That's the only thing that I would say works for me, because otherwise you just fall into a spiral of, there's nothing I can do, I'll never amount to anything within the country.
I think just adding on to that, if that's okay. Sorry, I just wanted to say maybe a step before that is we just need to reframe our perspective. I think as South Africans in general, I think we tend to be quite an audience democracy, in the sense that, you know, we hear something bad is happening in government and we sort of throw our hands up in the air and we talk about it at the dinner tables, and that's where it stays. But I think a lot of the time we don't realize that we actually have our own agency and we are actors as well in sort of the political system. And so what I'm trying to get at is, in order to sort of circumvent the pessimism that comes from, you know, hearing the news and understanding what's going on in the news cycle, we need to start having more of an agent perspective, to say, okay, I hear that this is what's happening in the news. How am I going to organize? How am I going to mobilize other people? And sort of having that almost solution-based perspective, if that makes sense.
And
so if I could just...
Sorry, go, Greg.
Just quickly, because I think Ruby's actually asked a really hard question. But I mean, and it's the lame cliche response, but also, I mean, you know, that's the power of the ballot box. And that's why I'm saying, voting is important. And to hear people saying like, no, you know what, my vote doesn't count, is really, it's challenging, because we will be disheartened, we'll be furious about something, but then in the same breath, like a month later, we'll say, no, I'm not voting. And you know what, like all the big political changes and stuff that happens at the ballot box. And I also think that there's this mentality that like, nah, but this party will just be a majority and they'll be in power forever until the chickens come home to roost and stuff. But just a bit of information, like how influential just the number of seats and the percentages you get in parliament has on putting in legislation. It's like one seat can make the difference. Or like back when there was the impeachment vote for Jacob Zuma in parliament. I mean, like a number of ANC members swung the other way and they decided to vote like, now we need to remove the boy. And like, it was quite tight in the end. So you know, it's one's vote does count, but mainly from the point of view that, like Naledi was saying, start with what you can do. And as an 18-year-old South African citizen, we can go and vote. And so I think it's important. Obviously, it's also your democratic right to not vote. But I often tell people, then spoil your paper. But it's why you aren't voting that's important. If you're treating it as a public holiday, that doesn't crack it for me. But if you feel that not voting is your vote, then that's fine. Yeah.
I also think, you know, do we not need a whole restructuring of the political system? You know, and I'm talking about like capitalism in general, democracy in general. You know, even our own government system, you know, like compared to the US system, like does that whole thing not need restructuring?
So I was wondering how I could actually incorporate this into the presentation tonight. Also a good question. But I've never been a huge fan of like, you call it like the political spectrum, left wing, right wing, and then on that you've got socialism, capitalism, and like it's obviously they're important ideologies because they're influential on things like policy formation, a party's manifesto, what ideology you subscribe for, all that kind of stuff. But I also really think that for once, I think Africa can try and find its own way, its own unique policy or ideology that suits the continent's needs best, rather than trying to import something from somewhere else that may have worked in another part of the world, but it doesn't quite fit Africa's like own problems. And it makes me think back to, I mean, a very interesting case study is on Singapore. It's honestly one of the most fascinating states in the world because, you know, they were amongst maybe the top 10 poorest countries in the world, like 40 years ago. And they had essentially a dictator come in for 40 years, but he was a benevolent dictator. God bless benevolent dictators. And you know what? What he did in Singapore was he found a pragmatic model, finding a model that works for Singapore's needs. And so I think that we almost need to forget about all of these hundreds of thousands of different ideologies. We need to try and find one that'll work best for South Africa and then obviously the continent too.
That's so interesting.
And sorry, I didn't mention that. You look at Singapore today, I think GDP per capita, I think they're top 3 wealthiest nations in the world.
No, they're doing awesome.
Flourishing state. They just found a model that works for them. Another huge thing, which I do believe in, and it's unfortunate it doesn't quite happen here, but is merit-based appointments. So when he was putting in somebody to run SAA or whatever, he made sure that the person was an aviation expert and knew how the industry cracks. So you only put merit-based people into high-profile positions.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the other thing is how few people, have taken the time to figure out who's their, I mean, I'm going to mess up the terminologies here, but like who's their like premier, who's managing their areas, who they can phone, who they can report things. I almost feel like we become so lazy at like complaining about the pothole and the water that's leaking and the this and the that. But it's like, how many of you actually have the numbers on your phone that you can take advantage of the systems that are set up? I phoned one the other day and was fixed literally the next day, and I was shocked. I was like, why haven't I tried this sooner? Why don't we just start phoning people whose jobs it is to fix stuff in this country instead of just complaining about it? I mean, and I'm also, implicated here, someone who did this.
I completely agree with that. I think that's what I've also been kind of looking for, is especially in this time where there's so much social media mobilization, and especially in America where it's like a big thing to phone into the local precinct to like demand justice for police killers and stuff police killings.
Yeah.
I wonder, first of all, to what extent, I don't know, obviously the South African equivalent, but does that kind of thing help? Do petitions help? Like what, especially during this time where like people have been much more active on like political issues. I think I'm also wondering, like, how do we get involved and how do we try and like change things, not just every 4 years?
I think like what you're saying now is almost like you being the mouthpiece for the youth in South Africa, because I think that's actually what makes people disillusioned by politics. It's kind of like, well, we can be angry and upset, but it'll do nothing. Nothing's going to change. You can't sell your shares like in a company and then go and buy in another one. I mean, you live in South Africa, and like you're saying, elections are 5 years away. What was I going to say?
I wonder if it would be actually a good thing to set up a sort of like a database or an Instagram page little thing people can share. Like if you're having problems with gender-based violence, you think like these are the numbers you should call, much like what they did with I'm gonna say her name wrong, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. Like, why can't we do that same thing where South Africans can be like, cool, these are the people I need to hound to make a difference?
Yeah.
So just before I forget it, Rube, I think a very interesting one, which could make a huge difference. I mean, there was that big Concord judgment the other day about the electoral system in South Africa, and now having independent candidates being able to run. I mean, how that will work.
Yeah, I was interested in that.
How the dynamics of how it will work, no clue. But I think that is a huge step, because if it was to become some sort of constituency based, where okay, I am now in Cape Town, Sea Point, and that your representative in the National Assembly is doesn't matter what party, he is your representative. The gap between you as a citizen and your representative in Parliament, and this is something people forget. People feel like parliamentarians control us when they forget that we vote them in. It's like they're our servants, not the other way around.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, not our servants, they're our representatives.
Yes. Servants of the people.
Servants of the people, exactly. That sometimes I feel like it gets forgotten. Whereas I think with that constituency, or like an independent candidate, that gap gets much thinner. Where you can go to, I don't know, MP, whoever, and say, nah, listen, what the hell happened in here, this place the other day, man? And then he'll go into the National Assembly and then rant on your behalf. That's how it's meant to be.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, because I was thinking about this. I mean, it might just be me being pessimistic, is that political, like MPs almost capitalize off the fact that people aren't aware of what's going on, or it's kind of like the more hidden the information is, the less accessible it is to the people and the less accountable MPs are.
Just a strange little example. You know, when I go to Parliament and I'll say like, nah, man, you should really come if someone's like quite interested in politics. They always say to me like, no, how much does it cost?
Yeah.
I'll be like, nah, Maji. I say,
Exactly.
that house is free. You're meant to go there and watch. That's like, these people are representing you.
Yeah.
You're
It's
not paying,
crazy. And
you're
it's
not
like,
paying,
sorry.
no, I'm just, no, go for it. I'm just saying, but like, it just shows the mentality that it's like you have to pay because they're doing a service for you. Oh, we're going to Parliament. Like, we must pay 10,000 Rand for a seat. Like, it's a stadium.
Yeah.
Whereas I always say to guys, like,
it's gotten lost, like the whole what it's meant to be.
the meaning.
Yes,
the meaning.
like
100%.
why government was created has been lost in like the politics of like party political allegiances and things like that. Yeah, I think also, so I
And
was
it's not
wondering,
far from us. That's another thing I feel. I feel
Yeah.
like people feel so far from the decisions, so far from what's going on.
Yeah.
And that leads to that like pessimism where they're like, I'm just not going to get involved in.
yeah, I think also what's tough in South Africa is the party system is the historical allegiances of people. I don't know if that could ever change.
And it was actually something I was going to kind of say to Breezy's question about like future in politics and like, you know, white male, whatever. I think in politics, it's as it stands. I think it will change because we're still dealing with like an old generation of leadership. But I think that you sort of streamlined according to you know, your historical background and your status and that's what I've always said to people. My big dream, like, do you want to be President Greg? I say like, obviously it'd be nice, whatever. I love it, but I would love to go and be like a DG, a Director General in a department, because you know what, you're serving the state. It's politics. It's what I love. Whatever. You're in a department, but you don't have any of that political madness behind you where you're having to put on a shirt and then go to rallies and all that kind of stuff. And actually, going back to our boy Alan Windey, the one thing I like about that whole scenario is he's not a big politician. He doesn't go up onto stage and do rallies and vote for me for this, that, whatever. The DA almost does that on his behalf. What I like about that situation is that he's qualified in public administration. So he's actually very well suited to the job. The DA just puts him there. And I actually quite like that. Less politics and more like, I don't know, public administration or whatever.
Yeah, like more service instead of you becoming a celebrity. You know, like I think when people lose sight of the fact that you're not voting for a person, you need to be voting for what they can do and fix, and you know what I mean? Like do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's not because you like the person, which I think is often what does happen. But it's also tough. It's like, I know we did this in law with like how people vote for the party because of reasons not to do with like their mandate or their policies. It's to do with like historical, which obviously like you can't deny that, and you can't say that it's unjustified because it has played such a big role in our history. But it's hard to imagine a political landscape where like that doesn't dominate.
And I mean, and I think going to what you're saying, what's huge in South Africa is actually the political brand. It's the brand itself is huge. We've seen, and the only exception, the curveball to this is obviously the EFF, but any new party with a new ideology or new policies, whatever, I mean, in a couple of years, it's just nothing. Cope was the third biggest party, 2009, next election, nothing. Achang fell out. I mean, I mean, obviously the EFF is the curveball because they're just growing and growing. But again, I think And interestingly, yeah, I think it all starts with local elections because you can start small, and then if you're able to prove yourself on a small scale as a party with a particular ideology, it can be like it can expand, it can spread to neighboring municipalities.
But how many people actually go and research, go and do that homework as to who I'm voting for, what are their policies? People are like, okay, DA, ANC, I'm going to watch a few things. Oh, okay, sweet, tick.
And I mean, that's why that's why I loved giving these speeches at school, because I was always hearing around me how so much was like, you could just hear it was just the words of someone in the family or close or something. You just hear it. And then I'll often be like, nah, but like, why do you think like that? Oh, I don't know. Oh.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing, is people don't actually form their own opinions. Like, they've just heard such and such is going to whatever. So now.
So like, I would have often always been like, you see, this is the thing. I like to challenge. I think it's important to challenge understandings, but often in doing that, it makes you seem like you're a sympathizer for whatever you saying.
Yeah.
When often that's not the case at all. So like, I was always coming across as this total Afro optimist, and I'm just got my head buried in the sand, and I've got no clue with all the issues that are behind me and around me. The reason I was doing, like, why people are thinking that is because, and you know what it's like, I promise you, this thing is like dominoes. Once one person in a group says, yo, this country's gone, guys, it's gone to the dogs, then it just goes like this, ding, it goes down the whole line, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So often I'll feel like sometimes I'm just a plug. But it's not necessarily like what I believe in. It's just to be like, but why are you saying it's gone to the dogs? And then it'll just be like, nah, there's no jobs or something. That is why the people that like make me shake in my skin are the ones that are very critical of South Africa and its future and are incredibly knowledgeable. So they'll just bash you with like everything, stats, economic performance, share prices, legislation. I'll be like, oh, wow, I can't challenge that. So I think it's all to do with being informed. I think that's what's so important.
Yeah, and also being sure that it's your opinion, not something you've heard from family, friends, whatever, that you've actually established this as something that you feel strongly about.
Yeah.
But it's weird how I think also South Africans, or at least I've found lots of people know a lot more about international politics, or like at least about the US and the UK, or maybe not even the UK, it's mainly the US. And they've somehow managed to just make politics so interesting, which I think is a weird concept that people like want to read up, and it's like everything's like saucy and juicy, and it's like a great thing to know about the primaries, elections, and the candidates, and like who's running for Democratic like candidate, and
because it's like a TV show. I mean, you like switch on like CNN during political times, and it's like this whole thing, their whole life's being unpacked. It's massive. It's like a TV show about these people's lives. Where in this country, it's like, oh my gosh, now I have to, oh no.
But it's maybe because we're watching from the outside, but it's also kind of like how the media
portrays it.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that, like the role that Twitter had in the last American presidency was enormous. And I think it's because, what's the whole 40 characters thing or whatever, 140, sorry, something like that. And so it's just a snippet. And then because you have to be concise, it's like, poof, that's what Trump said today. And then it's done. And I even looked like an essay. Like, people love Tito Mboweni's Twitter page because he's quite vocal on it. And you can gauge like what he's saying from his living room right now. So social media, I think, is definitely playing a huge role in politics.
Yeah. It's interesting. But I feel like also, as you said, with the old guard leaving, or as time goes on and they get older, things might start changing in the South African landscape.
I know, that's why I'm so upset. Like, I was hoping that we could leave the lady's question for the end, like future thoughts of South Africa and everything. Because obviously it's a good question. Yeah, I mean,
what
I
are
really,
your thoughts, Greg?
my thought, you know what, I think, because something actually I was wanting to say in my presentation, but you always do this in hindsight. People are fixed when I was at school with this idea that there's some land of milk and honey out there. And that's why they'll often say like, nah, this country's stuffed, I'm going to. And I really think that now, what COVID's done to the world and everything, it's challenging every country. No one's been immune. I mean, it's crippled the whole global economy. It's been devastating around the world. And it just shows that no country is immune. Everyone has their problems and their challenges. So I think, in my opinion, I think we were in a really tough spot, and I think it's got worse. So we're in an even worse place. But I also think that the whole world might have been okay, but now it's also bad for them. So I don't think that we in this really like gloomy predicament, and there's other places in the world that are just totally flourishing, because that's just not the case.
I think